Hi everyone, it's Paul Tilley and welcome to Unit 3 of PR2700 Project Management. In order to run a project, one of the things that we need to consider is how can we do it in such a way to maximize the outcome and minimize the amount of inputs and the amount of labor and resources that will go into it. This particular unit is focused on that, and what it will do is show you a systematic approach to managing projects. So let's begin. So the first thing you want to do is look at what are the resources for this particular module or particular unit. First of all, I'd like you to look at Unit 3 or Module 3, Project Management and Information Technology and Context. I'd like you to give that a good overview, and then as we go through, go into it in more detail. Also, you need to read Chapter 2 of the textbook Information Technology and Project Management. In terms of this unit, we're going to really look at three key learning objectives when we go through this. The first thing is we're going to look at this concept of the systems approach, and that's going to be important. We're going to see how the system approach can be used in project management using what's called a three-sphere model. And effectively what the three-sphere model does is it looks at what are the business elements, what are the organizational elements, and what are the technology elements that can impact the decisions we make and influence the success of the project. We're also going to define the terms of the project phase and the project life cycle and distinguish between project development and product development. And we're going to state the role of the four frames. And those four frames would consider a structural review, a human resource review, a political review, and symbolic review in order to really understand the organization better and how the organization will take on the project and help ensure that the project succeeds. Before we look at the systems view, let's put some context around this. So when you start a project, they tend to be unique and one-offs, as we've seen already. And that means they come with higher amounts of uncertainty in terms of price, time, required resources, overall risk, higher risk. So we really need to think before we undertake a project, what do we need to do in order to maximize the potential for success? So the systems approach is really designed to help facilitate that. And we're going to look at things when we think about the systems approach. We look at it as one big unit. We look at the organization, the structures of the organization, the people in it, what the people do, the culture of the organization. And we also look at the technology, which is external to the organization, and various other aspects of the business that can impact the potential for success of the particular project. So it's what's called really a multi-factor analysis. And really when we think about the systems approach, it really needs to include a systems philosophy, which is really kind of an overall model of thinking about how things work within a system. The systems analysis, which is really a problem-solving component to it. And systems management, which is really addressing these business technology and organizational issues before making changes in the system. Now you might say that's very theoretical, but what if we really put it down to a point of looking at IT projects and some of the challenges they face? Let's apply these basic concepts that we just talked about to that. Well, IT projects pose unique challenges to project managers and project stakeholders, like every other project. The projects can really be very diverse in terms of size. They can be small, they can be big, they can be complex, not so complex. Different products are produced, applications areas, the amount of resources required, all are different for different projects. So we really need to consider, what is our project? Is it a really complicated thing or not so complicated thing? IT project team members often have diverse backgrounds. You got people coming from different perspectives. You got web-based people, graphic designer type people, database people, network people. Do they have exactly the same perspective? No. And this is where the systems approach comes in. It says we need to integrate all of those perspectives before we make a decision. And IT projects use diverse technologies that change really rapidly. And, this poses some problems too, because what would have been a good idea last year may not work so well this year, or maybe there's a new product that is out there in the market that will do the job better. Let's put this to an example. Okay, let's assume you're a school and you're considering computer tablets for the school classroom. Now this happened in Newfoundland and Labrador during the COVID crisis, where government said, oh, we're going to shut down schools and we're going to make sure every student gets a Chromebook. Okay, that was kind of where it came from. But there were so many questions asked with regards to how that project would roll out. And this kind of gives an example of the various elements that we really should look at and that government had to look at. In terms of the business issues, we need to think, what will the tablet project cost? What will it cost students? What will support costs be? How are we going to keep this going? What will the impact be on enrollment? Will everyone use this, for example? In terms of the organization, government itself, we want to think, will the tablet project affect all students, just traditional students or only certain students? How will the project affect students who are able to have tablets or laptops? Who will develop special applications and books for these particular products or the tablets? And who'll train staff and faculty and all that sort of thing in the use of these? Then we got technology issues. Technology issues are the ones that probably jump out. Should the tablets be based on Apple, Microsoft, Android, or another system? What applications will be required? What will the hardware specifications be? How will the tablets affect various networks and speed? Will people be able to connect? These are normal questions that are asked of every project, particularly IT projects, and a lot of them just don't have immediate answers. That makes projects all the more uncertain, and it drives home the point that we need a systematic approach to resolving these issues as we move forward on a project. You've probably heard the old expression, eating the elephant one bite at a time. And effectively that's what projects do, is they take a huge, massive project, no matter how big the project is, you think of it all in one block, it gets overwhelming. But if you break it down into its subcomponents, it makes it more manageable. So projects need to be broken down into parts. Okay? Broadly, we can look at these parts in terms of 5 unique phases. These phases allow us to kind of get our head around different aspects of a project as it moves through. First and foremost, the very first is the conception and the initiation. This is, we realize we have a problem. We need something to resolve the problem. This is going to lead us to think, if we had a whatever, we could solve this problem. So it's the idea phase of the project. At that point, we really need to determine what exactly is it we want to do. This is called the project charter, which explains a rationale for why we're doing this project. And if we can convince our board of directors and our organization that this is valuable and should be proceeded forward, then we get into what's called the project initiation, which is really putting the project on a path forward. As we move forward, we got to get into more detailed planning, and this moves us into stage 2, which is definition and planning. We need to think about how big a project is this? What is the scope? How much money is it going to cost? The budget. So these are very important things, because if the scope is too big or if the budget's too big, the project will go nowhere. So we need to be able to kind of get a ballpark for how much this is going to cost and what we're going to do with it. We break down the components of the project into logical pieces. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and so on. This is what's called in the project management trade a work breakdown structure, which is effectively breaking it down into bite-sized chunks that need to be done. So it's a lot of thought of how the project is going to proceed, what needs to be done first, what needs to be done second, and so on. We use several tools such as a Gantt chart, which we'll look at in this course. A Gantt chart allows us to figure out what needs to be done and when. A communications plan, which is how we're going to be able to relay the information that needs to be relayed in order to move this forward. And we need to assess risk at each stage. What are the various risks here of potential project failures or problems that will come about that we need to think about so that we can get around these problems if they were to emerge. So we give it some thought beforehand. Moving into the third broad stage, we need the launch and execution, which is the actual start, let's get this rolling. So we need to be able to think about tracking it. What is its current status? So on a day-by-day basis or a week-by-week basis or a month-by-month basis, we need to say, where are we with regards to where we should be? towards the end. How far are we along in this project? Percentage of completion. KPI stands for Key Performance Indicators. Did we do what we said we were going to do? Did we make our target? For example, if we said we're going to get this project done in 12 months, in the first month, have we done 1/12 of the project? That's effectively what we're looking at. Quality, we want to ensure the quality. What are we doing in order to manage our quality? And forecasting what needs to be done next. So this involves just planning what's coming up. The fourth major phase is really just a carry-on of phase 3, which is performance and control, which is really ensuring that we meet our targets. So key objectives are set, and the quality deliverables, what needs to be done, who needs to be doing it, how much it's going to cost to do it, and performance. We really need to move into, let's get this done. Finally, as the project is completed, we have what's called the closeout phase, which is really looking what worked well, what didn't work so well, what would we do different next time. This post-mortem project punch list is really just saying where were the problems, what do we do to fix them, and the overall report structure. That model is really representing something called the project life cycle. And the project life cycle is really the collection of the phases that defines the project. So the project will start, go through its various steps that we've seen, and resolve with the goal being reached. So we got to think about it from the point of view of, when we think of a systematic approach, what work will be performed at each phase, what deliverables will be produced and when, who's involved in each phase, and how management will control and improve work produced at each phase. So we're going to have to start thinking about those things early on. And really a deliverable is the product or service that's produced or provided by the project. If we look at the project life cycle, in terms of its phases and the requirements that are thrust upon us, the early phases of a project, resources are usually lowest in terms of the products and services that we need to bring to solve this. The level of uncertainty, however, is very, very high at the beginning, and the project stakeholders have the greatest opportunities really to change or influence the project. In the middle phases of the project, as we move along, the certainty becomes greater. We can see what we're doing, we can see if we've been successful, we can kind of get a sense of where we are much better than we did at the beginning, because it's more real. But more resources are needed then too, so the planning really has to be focused on bringing the resources to bear in order to resolve the project, to bring it to fruition. The final phase of the project, we know, we can see where we are with the project, the requirements are met, the sponsor should be happy, whatever we've done should meet the goal that was originally set out, and everything should be good. If it's not, then we've got a problem. If we think about how we measure success or how we do all this type of thing as we move along, there's normally a couple of different models that are used, particularly in terms of software development. The first one is called a waterfall model. It's usually used for smaller projects. And it's a very simple approach. It says, let's look at everything sequentially. Let's do an analysis of the problem. Let's design a solution. Let's build the solution. Let's test the solution, and then put the solution in place and support it. One phase has to end before the next phase begins, and the ending of one phase really sets up for the next phase. So it naturally flows in. One thing naturally flows into another. This works very, very good for projects that can be well thought out and where there won't necessarily be changes as we go along. As I say, smaller projects, this works well in. We contrast this with something called the spiral model, and the spiral model does effectively the same thing. It brings us through the various stages, but what it does it in an iterative fashion. So for example, we start with the analysis, design, the implementation, and testing. We flow through that, but we flow through it in a spiral shape. So we're always reevaluating, all right? And it allows us to make changes as we go along by always reevaluating, where are we? Is this working? What do we do to change it? And for larger projects usually follow this type of spiral pattern where there's always an analysis of it and changes can be made. So management play an important role in this analysis. A project needs to pass through each of the stages successfully in order to continue to the next phase. So someone has to evaluate, is this being successful? And when that question is asked, we have to ask ourselves, what needs to change, if anything? Should we kill the project? Should the project stop right there? Do that by looking at the project progress, its likelihood of final success, and really the continued compatibility with the organizational goal. Let's go back to 1959, for example. Research the Avro Arrow. The Avro Arrow was a Canadian jet fighter that was being built back in the beginning of the Cold War. A lot of money was put into it. It had a lot of potential, but the federal government looked at it and said, well, we've got a lot of money poured into this, and we're not sure if fighter jets are the future. They shut down the project because of that. And, it just didn't meet with the organizational goals anymore. Despite the fact there was billions of dollars put into it and there was 15,000 people working on it, government thought the best decision was to shut it down. It's really unwise to wait to the end of the project before we make those decisions, because we'll just pour good money after bad. So we really need to look at those at each phase. Management needs to make those decisions. Should we continue? Should we not? What needs to change? If we can't change it, then we got to consider shutting it down. By now you should notice that really project success is people contingent. The organization is full of people. Those people need to be signed on to the project to ensure that the project moves forward, and when they're no longer signed on, then the project really is in some degree of jeopardy. So we need to think about the organization, kind of get a sense of why that happens. What's going on in an organization that can make people either support or work against a project? Let's think about it in terms of something called the 4 frames model. The 4 frames model really looks at the organization from a bunch of perspectives. First, we look at what's called the structural frame, the roles and responsibility, the coordination, control, the organizational charts. These are the formal tools that are used to describe people within the organization and the various roles they fill. Obviously, top management are going to be very important to the success of a project. Their continued support of the project will either lead to its success or contribute to its failure. Human resource frame. We have to think about people within the organization. Is there harmony between those people? Is everybody rowing the boat in the same direction? We need to ensure that all of the people in the organization can work towards supporting the project. The political frame. Well, coalitions get formed between various groups of people. As I say, those human resources have to be connected. And the political frame is very important, plays a very important role in connecting them. We have to think about different interest groups, resolving potential conflicts, working to ensure that everybody, again, can see eye to eye on how we can move this project forward. And we have the symbolic frame. The symbolic frame is really said about the organizational culture, the unwritten rules of an organization. These are as far from the official things as you can possibly imagine. So the structural frame is very official. The symbolic frame is very unofficial, but very important nonetheless. The culture, the language, the tradition, the images within the organization are going to play an important role into how well a project is received and how well it is carried out. When you're a project manager, you really need to think about, well, okay, how's this culture going to affect us? You think about what are some of the essences of organizational culture. Well, there are really 10 that have been identified. We look at member identity, how people relate to each other in the organization in their various roles. Is there a group emphasis? Is it a focus on an individual succeeding or the group succeeding? Is it a people organization? Is it a people orientation in terms of our number one goal in this organization is to worry about the people who work for it as opposed to the tasks that the organization does? We got to think about unit integration. How well do the units talk to one another? Are they connected? Is there one entity or is it really made up of a bunch of smaller entities? Control and stability. Is the organization maintaining status quo or is it always changing and growing? Because status quo is certainty, growth is uncertainty. And certain organizations have a tendency to want to stay with what they know and not move forwards. And this can often lead to some challenges with certain projects that are designed to change how things move. Innovation and risk-taking. Innovation and risk-taking are part of the change process. And if organizations are not really innovative and not really keen on risk, it makes projects that more susceptible to challenges as they move forward. What's the reward criteria? Do people get rewarded for change, or do they get rewarded for stability? Because if the reward system is set up to counter projects and change, then it's very difficult to move change and projects forward. How much conflict can an organization take? Is this an organization that is open to new ideas? Is there aggressive competitive behavior in organizations? That sometimes can challenge how successful a project is. Some organizations too have what's called a means end orientation, and it's really a focus on the goal, right? Do the employees work towards a goal and move in a direction that's designed to help new projects succeed, or are they really just there kind of doing the same thing they've always done? And finally, we got this open systems orientation. Organizations that are open to new ideas, open to change, open to what's going on out in the world are much more open to making projects succeed. Organizations that are closed, we do things like that because we've always done things like that. That type of organization, very difficult for projects to succeed in an orderly fashion. So top management play an important role in organizational success because, as we saw, those cultural elements are largely influenced by the people at the top. So project managers who have the support of top management and that strong level of commitment from the top, and if the top can communicate that down through the organization, that will help projects succeed. Sometimes we have what's called a project champion, which is someone who's a real rah-rah within the top of the organization to promote it, and those project champions help projects succeed. So what do top management need to do? They need to provide adequate resources. They need to be able to be open to and approve unique project needs in a timely manner, so timeliness is important. They have to work towards getting cooperation with all parts of the organization, so that communication role. And they got to mentor and coach on leadership issues in order to really help move things forward. Finally, we look at what are some of the other challenges that we are looking at here in terms of project management. And these are challenges as well as opportunities. Globalization is a key one. How the world interacts with each other now, global changes can affect your own organization. So what's going on somewhere else in the world will affect us. We know that. For example, the Newfoundland and Labrador oil industry certainly affected by global changes. If the price of oil goes up, our industry does better. If the price of oil goes down, our industry is challenged. And the price of oil is largely dependent on global events. Outsourcing, being able to contract out. Is it an in-house type project that we're developing, or is it something someone else is going to come in and do for us? And there tends to be a tendency to outsource a lot of these things now to project management experts. We've seen in COVID that virtual teams have become so important. We're doing this course virtually. It's an example of virtual teams. We see a lot more of that, and the technology is allowing that to happen. So people aren't necessarily face-to-face working on projects anymore, but they are doing it virtually. And this all leads into this idea of agile project management. We need to be able to be open to change, making changes quickly to adapt to changes as they occur. So agile project management is very important to project success. And that summarizes that unit. Again, if you have any questions, you let me know. Thanks. I'm Paul Tilley. See you next time.